a compilation of the real-life heroes of our time. Here are the true untold stories of people who went through difficult time but triumphed.
In the beginning, there was no empire, no rockets piercing the sky, no name etched into the history books. There was only a man, a desk made of old wooden doors, and a garage in Seattle. This is the story of Jeff Bezos, a man who walked away from safety to chase a future no one else could see. They say history is shaped by loud moments. But Jeff Bezos' story didn't begin with applause. It began in silence, a silence broken only by the hum of a computer, the scratch of a pen on paper, and a question that would not leave his mind. What if, before the billions, before the rockets, before the headlines that called him the richest man on earth, there was just a boy, curious, restless, obsessed with how things worked? Jeffrey Preston Bezos was born in 1964 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His biological father left early, and Jeff was later adopted by a Cuban immigrant named Miguel Bezos, a man who arrived in America with little more than courage and belief. That belief became a foundation. Miguel taught Jeff something powerful without ever saying it aloud. Nothing is guaranteed except the value of hard work. Young Jeff was different. While other kids played, he dismantled. He took apart alarm clocks, toys, machines, not to break them, but to understand them. Curiosity wasn't a hobby. It was his nature. Jeff Bezos didn't grow up dreaming of fame. He dreamed of systems. At Princeton University, he studied electrical engineering and computer science, not because it was trendy, but because it was foundational. He graduated near the top of his class. The world opened its doors. Wall Street welcomed him. By his early 30s, Bezos had what many people spend their entire lives chasing: a prestigious job, a six-figure salary, a fast-rising career, security. He worked at a hedge fund called D. E. Shaw, one of the smartest firms in finance. His boss saw something rare in him, not just intelligence, but vision. Jeff Bezos was on a fast track to the top, and then he noticed something strange. In 1994, Bezos came across a statistic that would hijack his thoughts. Internet usage was growing at 2,300% per year, not 23%, not 230%, 2,300%. To most people, it was just a number. To Bezos, it was a signal, a door cracking open, a future whispering. He started listing ideas, what could be sold online: CDs, software, office supplies, books. Books stood out, millions of titles. No physical store could carry them all, but the internet could. That's when the real battle began. Not in the market, not with competitors, but inside his own mind. Jeff Bezos did something few people ever do. He thought about being 80 years old. He imagined looking back on his life, and he asked himself a brutal question. Which decision would I regret more, trying and failing or never trying at all? He called it the regret minimization framework. It terrified him because the answer was clear. Staying safe would hurt more than falling. So Jeff Bezos did the unthinkable. He walked away from comfort, from certainty, from a job people envied. His boss tried to talk him out of it. "Jeff," he said, "this is a good idea, but would be a better idea for someone who didn't already have a great job." Jeff listened, and still left. In the summer of 1994, Jeff Bezos and his wife, Mackenzie, packed their car and drove from New York to Seattle. That road trip became the birthplace of Amazon. As the miles passed, Jeff wrote a business plan on his laptop in the passenger seat. No grand office, no investors, no safety net, just belief and risk. Seattle was chosen for a reason: proximity to tech talent, access to book distributors, a growing startup culture. When they arrived, they didn't rent an office. They rented a house and turned the garage into headquarters. Amazon didn't start with luxury. It started with folding tables, cheap desks, bara concretfloors. Jeff built desks out of wooden doors to save money. He called them door desks. They became a symbol, a reminder that frugality fuels innovation. Every dollar mattered. Every mistake hurt. Orders started coming in. At first, Jeff personally packaged books. He drove them to the post office himself. When a bell rang signaling a sale, everyone cheered. Until sales increased so fast, the bell became annoying. So they turned it off. Success had begun to whisper. But it wasn't easy. Investors laughed. Competitors dismissed Amazon as a bookstore that will fail. Critics said, people won't buy books without touching them. Online shopping won't last. This company is burning too much money. And they weren't entirely wrong. Amazon lost money for years. Jeff Bezos wasn't trying to look profitable. He was trying to build infrastructure. While others chased quick wins, he played a long game, a dangerous game, because patience is expensive and faith is lonely. Jeff Bezos made one thing non-negotiable: customer obsession, not competitor obsession, not profit obsession, not ego obsession, customer obsession. He believed, if you take care of the customer, everything else will follow. Lower prices, faster delivery, better experience, even if it hurt in the short term, even if Wall Street complained. He ignored the noise. He focused on the future. By the late 1990s, Amazon was no longer just a garage experiment. It was becoming something dangerous, something disruptive, something that would shake retail, logistics, technology, and eventually the entire world. But the hardest years were still ahead. The dot-com bubble was coming, and it would nearly destroy everything Jeff Bezos had built. Success didn't arrive gently. It arrived with a storm. By the late 1990s, the internet was exploding. Dot-com startups were everywhere. Investors were throwing money at anything with .com in its name. Amazon went public in 1997. Jeff Bezos rang the bell. The world watched. And then the knives came out. On paper, Amazon looked impressive. Explosive growth. Millions of customers. Global attention. But behind the scenes, Amazon was bleeding cash. Jeff Bezos wasn't hiding it. He said it openly. We are not focused on short-term profits. Wall Street hated that sentence. Analysts wanted quarterly wins. Bezos wanted decades. Amazon expanded aggressively. Warehouses, technology, international markets. Each expansion burned more money. The media started sharpening headlines. Amazon will never be profitable. Bezos is reckless. This is the Pets.com of books. Jeff Bezos became a public experiment. And then came the crash. In 2000, the bubble exploded. Tech stocks collapsed. Billions vanished overnight. Companies folded by the thousands. Amazon stock fell over 90%. 90%. From hero to fool in the eyes of the world. Jeff Bezos' face was everywhere. On magazine covers. In ridicule. In cautionary tales. People whispered, "See? It was just a phase." Employees panicked. Investors fled. Competitors celebrated. And Jeff Bezos? He didn't quit, but he felt it. Leadership is glamorized, but the truth? Leadership is isolation. Jeff Bezos had to lay people off. Brilliant people, loyal people, friends. He cut costs aggressively, closed projects, paused dreams, simplified operations. Every decision carried weight. If he was wrong, Amazon would die, and his name would become a footnote. This is where Bezos revealed something rare: emotional discipline. He didn't panic. He didn't react to headlines. He didn't chase approval. Instead, he doubled down on fundamentals: reduce waste, improve logistics, speed up delivery, lower prices even further. While others were shrinking to survive, Amazon was quietly sharpening its blade. Jeff believed downturns were not endings. They were filters. Only the strongest ideas survived. In 2001, Amazon posted its first profit. It wasn't huge, but it was symbolic, a signal. The critics went quiet, briefly. Jeff Bezos didn't celebrate. He warned his team, this is not an arrival. This is a checkpoint. He knew something others didn't. Survival was not the goal. Dominance was. Amazon stopped thinking like a bookstore. It started thinking like a platform. Bezos asked dangerous questions. What else can we sell? What else can we build? What if we become the infrastructure? Electronics, clothing, household items. Then something revolutionary. Amazon Marketplace. They let other sellers sell on Amazon. People thought he was crazy. Why invite competition? Because Bezos didn't fear competition. He feared irrelevance. Inside Amazon, engineers built tools to handle massive traffic. Servers, storage, cloud infrastructure. Bezos noticed something. What if these tools weren't just for Amazon? What if they were sold to everyone else? In 2006, Amazon launched Amazon Web Services, AWS. It didn't make headlines at first, but it quietly became the backbone of the internet. Netflix, Airbnb, NASA, startups, governments. AWS became Amazon's most profitable division. The garage bookstore was now powering the digital world. Despite growth, Bezos refused to let Amazon age. He kept meetings uncomfortable. He left an empty chair in boardrooms. The customer's chair. He demanded clarity. He hated PowerPoint. He forced teams to write 6-page narratives. Why? Because ideas should stand without hype. Bezos believed, disagree and commit. Argue fiercely. Then execute fully. No ego. No excuses. But greatness has a cost. Jeff Bezos became known as demanding, relentless, uncompromising. Work-life balance suffered. Criticism followed. Scrutiny intensified. The world debated. Was he a visionary or a tyrant? Bezos didn't respond. He kept building. By the 2010s, Amazon was unstoppable. Same-day delivery, Prime subscriptions, Alexa, Kindle, global dominance. Retail collapsed. Malls died. Entire industries reshaped themselves around Amazon. Jeff Bezos was no longer underestimated. He was feared. The man once mocked as reckless had outlived crashes, critics, predictions of failure. But his journey wasn't over, because Jeff Bezos wasn't chasing money. He was chasing impact, and his boldest dream had nothing to do with Earth. Jeff Bezos didn't wake up one day wanting to be rich. He woke up wanting to build things that last. Money was never the destination. It was a fuel. By the time Amazon crossed into global dominance, Jeff Bezos had achieved what most people only imagine. And yet he was restless. Because visionaries don't stop when they arrive. They stop when they run out of impossible questions. Long before Amazon. Long before Wall Street. Before the garage. Jeff Bezos had another obsession. Space. As a child, he watched the Apollo missions. He read science fiction. He imagined humanity living beyond Earth, while others grew out of childhood dreams. Bezos refined his. He believed something radical. Earth is the best planet we have, and we should protect it by moving heavy industry off-world. This wasn't fantasy. It was strategy on a timeline longer than most lifetimes. In 2000, when Amazon was still fighting for survival, Bezos quietly founded Blue Origin. No press tours, no hype, no noise, just engineers. Physics, patience, the company's motto, graded him ferociter. Step by step, ferociously. While others chased fast rockets and headlines, Bezos chose reusable systems. Slow, precise, unforgiving. The same philosophy that built Amazon. Jeff Bezos funded Blue Origin personally. How? By selling billions of dollars of Amazon stock every year. Not to buy yachts. Not for excess. To fund a dream most people thought was ridiculous. He didn't explain. He didn't defend it. He simply did it. Because long-term thinkers don't wait for permission. In 2021, Jeff Bezos stepped down as CEO of Amazon. The world reacted with shock. Why leave at the top? Because builders know when to pass the torch. Bezos wasn't walking away from Amazon. He was freeing himself to build what came next. On July 20th, 2021, exactly 52 years after the Apollo 11 moon landing, Jeff Bezos went to space. Not as a passenger, as a founder, as a risk-taker, as proof. When he landed, he said something simple. The Earth is very beautiful. For a man who had conquered markets, the view reminded him what mattered. Jeff Bezos is often reduced to numbers: net worth, market share, power. But numbers don't tell the story. The story is this: a man risked comfort for curiosity, security for possibility, approval for vision. He built while others doubted. He waited while others rushed. He endured while others quit. Jeff Bezos proved something uncomfortable. Talent isn't enough. Intelligence isn't enough. Even money isn't enough. What matters is long-term thinking, obsession with fundamentals, willingness to be misunderstood, courage to start small, strength to last. A garage can change a world if the mind inside it refuses to shrink. Jeff Bezos didn't succeed because he avoided risk. He succeeded because he embraced it early, managed it patiently, and survived it relentlessly. From a garage to the global economy to the edge of space, his story reminds us the future belongs to those willing to look foolish today. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that small beginnings don't define the ending, then share, and subscribe. Because somewhere right now, someone is standing in their own garage, wondering if the risk is worth it. And this might be the sign they need. Somewhere right now, there's a garage that no one notices. No uplos, no cameras, no investors waiting at the door. Just an idea and a person standing at the edge of a decision. Jeff Bezos didn't begin with certainty. He began with courage. He didn't know the outcome. He only knew the risk of never trying would hurt more than failure. The world will always applaud success, but it rarely honors beginnings. It will doubt you. It will rush you. It will ask you to stay comfortable. But history is written by those who choose the long road, when shortcuts look safer. So if your dream feels too small, if your resources feel inadequate, if your starting point feels embarrassing, remember this: a garage was enough. An idea was enough. Belief was enough. The future doesn't belong to the loudest voices. It belongs to the patient builders. And maybe, just maybe, the next story the world will tell starts exactly where you are standing right now. If this story stirred something inside you, don't ignore it. Like this video. Share it with someone standing at the edge. Subscribe for stories that remind you what's possible. Because the world doesn't need more spectators. It needs more builders. Madam C.J. Walker, orphaned washerwoman, billion-dollar legacy, the first self-made female millionaire. She was not born into comfort. She was not born into opportunity. She was born into ashes, and expectation was never part of her inheritance. In December of 1867, on a cotton plantation in Delta, Louisiana, a child was born with a name that history would one day struggle to contain: Sarah Breedlove. She was the first child in her family born free, but freedom in those days was a fragile word. Slavery had ended only 2 years earlier. The chains were gone, but hunger remained. Racism remained. Exploitation simply changed its uniform. Sarah's parents had survived slavery. They carried scars no one documented. They worked the same land under the same sun for wages that barely kept breath in their lungs. Freedom did not come with land. It did not come with education. It did not come with protection. And for Sarah, freedom did not come with childhood. By the age of 7, both her parents were dead. 7, an orphan before she could spell the word. A child without shelter in a world that had no mercy for black girls. A little girl forced to grow up in a single breath. She moved in with her older sister and brother-in-law, working in the fields, picking cotton, scrubbing floors, learning early that survival was not a choice. It was a daily obligation. There were no dreams. There was no future planning. There was only the next meal or the lack of it. By 14, Sarah married not out of romance, but out of survival. In a time when being an unprotected black girl meant vulnerability to abuse, marriage was sometimes the only shield available. At 17, she became a mother, a daughter named Lelia, who would later be known as a Lelia Walker. But even motherhood did not slow tragedy. By 20, Sarah was a widow, Again alone. Again responsible for another life. Again staring at a future that offered no mercy. With no education beyond a few months of schooling, Sarah did what millions of black women did at the time to survive. She washed clothes, day after day, hour after hour, hands submerged in boiling water, lies soap-burning skin raw, backs bent until pain became normal. She earned less than $1.50 a day. But even in poverty, she carried a quiet rebellion inside her. I got my start by giving myself a start. That sentence would one day echo across history. She saved every penny she could. She refused alcohol. She refused distractions. While others collapsed from exhaustion, she whispered prayers into the night. Prayers for escape. Prayers for dignity. Prayers for something more than survival. But life wasn't finished testing her. In her early 30s, Sarah began losing her hair. Severely, clumps fell out. Bald patches formed. Her scalp burned and bled. Poor nutrition, harsh chemicals, stress, and untreated conditions common among black women at the time made hair loss almost inevitable, yet deeply humiliating. In a society where black women were already told they were undesirable, losing her hair felt like losing the last visible piece of her identity. She tried store-bought remedies. She tried homemade treatments. Nothing worked. And then something happened. She dreamed. In that dream, she said a man appeared and revealed a formula, oils, herbs, and preparation methods. Whether divine or psychological, one thing is certain. She acted on it. She experimented. She tested. She refined. She healed her scalp. Her hair returned, stronger than before. And in that moment, Sarah saw something few people ever see while standing in the middle of their pain. A problem that could become a purpose. She began selling hair treatments door to door, not in luxury, not with investors, not with protection. She walked, she knocked, she demonstrated. She educated women about hygiene, scalp health, and self-care, concept denied to them by both society and industry. And something remarkable happened. The women listened. Because Sarah wasn't selling beauty, she was selling restoration. She wasn't selling vanity, she was selling dignity. In 1906, she married Charles Joseph Walker, and with that marriage, she renamed herself Madam C.J. Walker. The title Madam was intentional. It demanded respect in a world that denied her one. Madam Walker did not just sell products. She built systems. She trained women, thousands of them, as agents. She taught them how to earn, how to save, how to speak confidently, how to wear themselves like women who mattered. At a time when black women were boxed into servitude, Madam Walker created entrepreneurs. Her company expanded across the United States, the Caribbean, and Central America. She opened factories, beauty schools, and offices. She employed more than 20,000 women, former washerwomen, former cooks, former maids, women who had never owned anything now owned income. And ownership changes everything. By the 1910s, Madam C.J. Walker had achieved something the world said was impossible. She became the first self-made female millionaire in American history. Not inherited, not married into, not handed down, built. From cotton fields to boardrooms, from Lice soap to laboratories, from orphan to icon. But wealth was never her final goal. Madam Walker gave generously. She funded black schools. She donated to anti-lynching campaigns. She supported the NAACP. She built community centers and housing projects. She understood something rare. Money is power, but legacy is purpose. When she died in 1919 at the age of 51, newspapers across the country reported her death. Presidents acknowledged her impact. Thousands mourned. She had rewritten what was possible. Madam C.J. Walker once said, "I am a woman who came from the cotton fields of the South. From there, I was promoted to the wash tub. From there, I was promoted to the cook kitchen. And from there, I promoted myself into the business of manufacturing hair goods." That is not just a biography. That is a blueprint. Success never arrives quietly, especially when it wears the face of a black woman who refuses to stay small. By the time Madam C.J. Walker's products began spreading beyond neighborhood kitchens and church halls, the world noticed, and not everyone was happy. Early 1900s America was not designed for her success. Black-owned businesses were tolerated only when they remained invisible. Black women with authority were considered an offense, and black women making money, real money, were seen as a disruption. Madam Walker was all three. She wasn't just selling hair products. She was building an industry. She traveled constantly, train after train, city after city, speaking to crowds of black women who had never been addressed as customers, much less as future business owners. She spoke about hygiene, health, economic independence, self-respect, financial literacy. These were radical ideas, because empowered women don't remain silent. As her influence grew, so did competition, including from within her own community. Another black female entrepreneur, Annie Malone, had pioneered hair care earlier and had once employed Sarah Breedlove herself. Now, Madam Walker was building her own empire. Whispers spread. She copied. She stole. She didn't invent anything. But here's the truth history eventually made clear. Innovation isn't just creation. It's execution. Madam Walker didn't simply sell a product. She scaled a movement. She understood branding. She understood training. She understood distribution. She understood something even more powerful. People don't just buy solutions, they buy belief. And she believed in women. What she built became known as the Walker system. It wasn't just about hair. It was about cleanliness in an era without running water, health in communities denied medical care, confidence in society that thrived on humiliation. She trained her agents not to beg for customers, but to educate them. Every woman who joined her company received business training, sales instruction, personal grooming education, moral discipline, financial independence. Madam Walker insisted her agents be paid well, dress professionally, and carry themselves with dignity. She once said, "I want you to have a better life than I had." And she meant it. Most companies of the era hired workers. Madam Walker created leaders. Her agents earned commissions that allowed them to buy homes, send children to school, support relatives, donate to churches, build savings. For women who had never been allowed to dream beyond survival, this was revolutionary. Some critics accuse her of encouraging vanity, but they misunderstood, because this wasn't about beauty standards. This was about ownership, ownership of income, ownership of time, ownership of self-worth. As her wealth increased, so did her visibility. She purchased property in Harlem at a time when few black families could. She built Villa Luro, a mansion so grand it forced America to confront what it had denied for centuries. A black woman had arrived. The house wasn't just luxury. It was a statement, a place for gatherings, a place for political discussions, a place for art, strategy, and black excellence. She hosted leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, civil rights activists, artists and thinkers. Money had given her access, but purpose gave her direction. Madam Walker never forgot where she came from. She had been poor. She had been invisible. She had been powerless. And now that she wasn't, she used her platform deliberately. She donated thousands to anti-lynching campaigns, black schools and colleges, orphanages, the NAACP, housing initiatives. She spoke publicly against racial violence at a time when silence was safer. She understood that success without service is empty, and she refused to be empty. But leadership comes at a cost. Travel exhausted her. Stress weakened her body. Pressure never stopped. She worked relentlessly, not because she loved wealth, but because she felt responsible. Responsible to the women watching her. Responsible to the future she was helping create. Responsible to the little orphan girl she once was. Her health began to fail. But even then, she refused to slow down. By the late 1910s, Madam C.J. Walker had achieved global reach. Her products were sold across the United States, the Caribbean, Central America. She had factories, beauty schools, and offices employing thousands. And yet, she remained controversial. Some praised her, some criticized her, some tried to erase her, but none could deny her impact, because history doesn't remember who was comfortable. It remembers who was bold. In 1919, at just 51 years old, Madam C.J. Walker's body gave out. Hypertension, kidney failure, a life burned brightly and briefly, but her story didn't end with her last breath. It multiplied. When Madam C.J. Walker died in May of 1919, the world didn't just lose a businesswoman. It lost a symbol of what happens when a woman refuses to accept the limits assigned to her birth. She was 51 years old, too young to be finished, too powerful to be forgotten. Her death rippled through Black America like an aftershock. Thousands mourned, not because she was rich, but because she was relatable. She had been them. She had stood where they stood. She had felt what they felt. And she had risen anyway. Her funeral was not small. It was not quiet. It was not private. Leaders spoke. Activists gathered. Workers wept. She was remembered not just as a millionaire, but as a builder of people. Booker T. Washington called her a woman who had won success by conquering difficulties. But even that felt too small, because she didn't just conquer obstacles. She redefined victory. Madam Walker did not leave chaos. She left structure. Her company continued. Her factory stayed open. Her agents kept working. Thousands of women remained employed because she had built something bigger than herself. Her daughter, Alelia Walker, inherited not just wealth, but responsibility, and she carried it with grace. Alelia was not her mother. She didn't grow up in poverty. She didn't wash clothes for survival. She didn't fight for basic access. But she understood something equally difficult: how to protect a legacy in a world eager to dismantle it. Alelia became a patron of the arts during the Harlem Renaissance. She opened her doors to writers, musicians, poets, and thinkers. Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, artists who shaped Black culture, found refuge in spaces funded by a woman whose mother had once been invisible. That is generational transformation. And yet, history has a habit of selective memory. As decades passed, Madam C.J. Walker's name faded from textbooks. Her wealth was questioned. Her self-made status debated. Her innovations minimized. Why? Because society is uncomfortable with undeniable Black female excellence. It is easier to frame her as lucky, easier to call her an exception, easier to shrink her story into a footnote. But facts don't disappear because they make people uncomfortable. She was orphaned at 7. She worked as a washerwoman. She educated herself. She built an empire. She created tens of thousands of jobs. She became a millionaire without inheritance. Those are not opinions. Those are records. And no amount of silence can erase them. Madam C.J. Walker's life is not just history. It is instruction. She teaches us. You don't need permission to rise. You don't need perfect conditions to begin. You don't need to be chosen. You can choose yourself. She understood that empowerment multiplies when shared. That success without uplift is hollow. That visibility creates pathways for others to follow. She once said, "I had to make my own living and my own opportunity." And that sentence still echoes today. In every woman starting from nothing, in every entrepreneur without investors, in every dreamer told they are unrealistic, she is proof that greatness does not require approval. Madam C.J. Walker did not wait for history to recognize her. She forced history to adjust. She walked into rooms not built for her and changed them. She created wealth where poverty was expected. She turned pain into purpose. She turned survival into legacy. And long after the money faded, the impact remained. She was never supposed to matter. Not as a Black woman. Not as an orphan. Not as a washerwoman with cracked hands and empty pockets. History did not reserve space for her. So she made space. Madam C.J. Walker did not wait for doors to open. She built her own house and invited the world inside. She proved that poverty is not a life sentence, that beginnings do not define endings, and that greatness often starts in silence. She turned pain into product. She turned struggle into strategy. She turned self-belief into an empire. And maybe the most powerful thing she ever did wasn't becoming a millionaire. It was showing thousands of women that they could become something too. Her hands once scrubbed other people's clothes. Those same hands later signed paychecks, built factories, and funded freedom. That is transformation. So if you are watching this feeling unseen, if you are starting with nothing, if the world has underestimated you, remember her story. Because Madam C.J. Walker was not an exception. She was a reminder that you can rise from anywhere, that you can promote yourself, that your story doesn't end where society expects it to. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own potential, share it, because someone else needs to hear this. Subscribe for more stories that awaken purpose, resilience, and power. And leave a comment with one word that describes what the story made you feel. Because legacies don't just live in history books. The Rejected Genius. The Steve Jobs story. Some lives are not born, they are forged. Some destinies are not given, they are fought for. And some legends are not accepted, they are rejected first. This is the story of a man who was abandoned before he was chosen. A visionary who was celebrated, then cast out. A creator who lost everything, only to return and change the world forever. This is the story of Steve Jobs. Adopted, betrayed, broken, yet unbreakable. Fired from the very company he built, only to rise again like a phoenix and transform it into one of the most powerful companies in history. In a world that worships success, we rarely speak about the cost of greatness. Tonight, we walk through that. February 24th, 1955. San Francisco, California. A child is born into uncertainty. A baby with no choice, no voice, no control over his destiny. His biological parents, young, afraid, and unprepared, made a decision that would shape his life before he could even breathe on his own. They placed him for adoption. He was handed to strangers, not royalty, not wealth, just ordinary people with ordinary lives. Paul and Clara Jobs. But sometimes, destiny hides in ordinary places. While other children were learning to walk, Steve Jobs was learning to wonder. While others played with toys, he played with ideas. While others accepted the world as it was, he questioned why it existed that way. In the Jobs household, there was no luxury, but there was curiosity. No privilege, but there was possibility. And in that small home, a future titan of technology was quietly being shaped. As a teenager, Steve was different. Not rebellious in the ordinary sense, but intellectually dangerous. He did not accept because I said so. He wanted to know. Why? How? What if? In a garage, the birthplace of many dreams, Steve Jobs met another young genius, Steve Wozniak. Two minds, one destiny. Where Wozniak built machines, Jobs saw possibilities. Where others saw wires and metal, Jobs saw the future of humanity. And so, in 1976, in a humble garage, Apple was born. Not in a skyscraper, not in a boardroom, but in dust, sweat, and pure belief. Fast-paced visuals. Apple I, Apple II, early computers. Apple did not grow, it exploded. The Apple I was a spark. The Apple II became a revolution. Suddenly, Steve Jobs was no longer the adopted boy with questions. He was a young billionaire with answers. The world began to watch him. Investors admired him. Media praised him. Silicon Valley crowned him. But with power came pride. And with pride came conflict. Music becomes darker. Boardroom visuals. Newspaper headlines. Steve Jobs ousted from Apple. 1985. A year that would scar Steve Jobs forever. In a cruel twist of fate, the very board he helped build turned against him. The company he created rejected him. The empire he birthed cast him out. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. Imagine this, building a house from nothing, only to be locked outside. Planting a tree, only to be told you can no longer sit beneath it. To the world, he was still rich, still famous, still powerful. But inside, he was broken, betrayed, disgraced. And yet destiny was not finished with him. Slow visuals, empty office, lonely walks, quiet reflection. In exile, Steve Jobs could have quit. He could have disappeared into comfort and luxury. He could have lived quietly and peacefully. But visionaries do not rest in comfort. They are restless by design. Instead of surrendering, Jobs began again. He founded Next. He invested in Pixar, a small animation studio that would later redefine storytelling. Rejection refined him. Failure humbled him. And isolation sharpened his mind. Sometimes you must be broken to be rebuilt. Apple acquires Next. Steve Jobs returns. 1997. Apple was dying. The company that once led the world was now struggling to survive. And in its desperation, it called back the man it once banished. Steve Jobs returned, not as a boy seeking approval, but as a king reclaiming his throne. He cut products. He focused vision. He simplified design. And slowly, Apple began to breathe again. Then came the iMac, then the iPod, then the iPhone, then the iPad. One man reshaping the world. Apple was no longer just a company. It became a culture, a lifestyle, a symbol of creativity and innovation. Steve Jobs did not just build devices. He changed how humans communicate, create, and connect. The adopted boy had become a global icon. The rejected founder had become a legend. The fired visionary had returned to rewrite history. On October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away. But his vision did not. His spirit did not. His impact did not. His life teaches us this. Rejection does not mean failure. Setbacks do not mean the end. And being pushed out does not cancel your destiny. Steve Jobs was adopted, fired, humiliated, yet he returned and transformed the world. And perhaps, somewhere, another rejected child is watching, ready to change everything. In the end, Steve Jobs was not just a man of machines. He was a man of meaning. His story is not merely about technology. It is about resilience, not just innovation, but transformation. He was abandoned, yet chosen, rejected, yet destined, cast out, yet called back. The world tried to silence his vision, but vision does not die with rejection. It matures in it. Apple stands today not only as a company, but as proof that failure can be a foundation and exile can be a classroom. Steve Jobs reminds us that greatness is rarely born in comfort. It is forged in struggle, shaped by pain, and proven through persistence. And so, his life leaves us with one enduring question. What will you build with your second chance? Because somewhere between rejection and return, your destiny is waiting. If this story stirred something in you, if it challenged you, inspired you, or made you see failure differently, then let your voice be heard. Steve Jobs' story reminds us that life is never random. Every twist, every setback, every moment of rejection can be part of a greater plan. He was adopted, fired, and cast aside, yet God's purpose for him could not be denied. What the world saw as failure, God used as preparation. What felt like exile, God used a refined vision. What seemed like an ending, God used as a beginning of transformation. His life shows us this truth. Faith is not about avoiding trials. Faith is about trusting the process, even when the path is unclear. And so, if you're facing rejection, failure, or uncertainty today, know that you are being prepared for something greater than you can imagine. If this story spoke to your heart, let it be more than inspiration, like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope, and leave a comment. Tell us how God is shaping your destiny through your trials. Remember, what is impossible for man is possible with God, and your second chance is already on its way. Before the world knew his name, before Alibaba changed global commerce, before billions followed his vision, there was a man who was told, "You are not good enough." Over and over and over again, rejected from more than 30 jobs, rejected by universities, rejected by corporations, rejected by systems that never saw value in his voice. Yet, he refused to reject himself. This is not a story about money. This is a story about resilience. This is a story of Jack Ma. Jack Ma, rejected by the world, refused to disappear before the speeches, before the applause, before the headlines and billions. There was silence, the kind of silence that follows rejection, the kind that sits beside you on the bus ride home, the kind that whispers questions you don't want to answer. Why me? Why not me? Why does everyone else move forward while I stay behind? This is where the story of Jack Ma truly begins. Not with success, not with vision, but with being overlooked. Hangzhou, China, a historic city, ancient temples, quiet streets. Jack Ma was born into ordinary circumstances. No silver spoon, no powerful lineage, no inherited advantage. His parents were traditional performers, storytellers themselves, but life was modest. Survival came before dreams. From the beginning, Jack Ma struggled where others thrived. In school, he wasn't impressive. He wasn't exceptional. He wasn't even average. He was behind. Some children shine early. Others are forced to grow in the shadows. Jack Ma failed exams repeatedly, especially mathematics. Each failure was not just a grade. It was a message. You're slow. You're different. You don't belong here. And when the world starts repeating a message long enough, even the strongest minds begin to believe it. Jack Ma failed his primary school exams, then failed his middle school exams, then failed his college entrance exams. Twice. While his classmates moved ahead, Jack stayed behind. Again and again. Failure didn't arrive as a surprise anymore. It arrived as a routine. Teachers didn't expect much. Peers quietly moved on. Opportunities closed before they ever opened. But something unusual was happening beneath the surface. Jack Ma was learning something no classroom taught. He was learning how to endure. Every morning, young Jack Ma rode his bicycle to a nearby hotel. Not for a job, not for money, for strangers, foreign tourists. He offered free tours of Hangzhou, not because he had confidence, but because he had curiosity. He wanted to learn English. While others memorized textbooks, Jack listened to accents. While others chased grades, Jack chased conversation. For 9 years, he practiced English this way. 9 years of discipline, without reward. Greatness often begins disguised as something small, repetitive, and lonely. Jack Ma finally applied to university. He failed. Again, the rejection letter didn't scream cruelty. It whispered disappointment. He tried again. This time, he was accepted into a teacher's college, not a prestigious university, not a powerful degree, but it was a door, and Jack Ma walked through it. Jack Ma graduated, degree in hand, hope cautiously intact. Then reality arrived. He applied for jobs, and the world said no. Again, he applied everywhere. Hotels, restaurants, police force, office work. Rejected. Again, and again, and again. More than 30 job applications. All refused. Then came the moment that would scar and later define him. A KFC opened in Hangzhou. 24 applicants. 23 accepted. 1 rejected. Jack Ma. Sometimes rejection isn't loud. Sometimes it's watching everyone else walk inside while you stand outside, holding your application. This wasn't about chicken or a job. It was about being chosen. And Jack Ma wasn't. Jack Ma applied to Harvard University. Rejected. He applied again. Rejected. 10 times. 10. Most people stop after the first no. Some stop after the third. Jack Ma collected rejection letters like evidence. Not of failure, but of persistence. What does it do to a man? To always be the one left behind? To always be told, not you? Bitterness could have grown. Anger could have hardened him. But Jack Ma made a quiet decision. If I cannot be the smartest, I will be the most resilient. Jack Ma travels to the United States. There, he encounters something unfamiliar. A computer. The internet. He searches one word. China. Nothing. No businesses. No stories. No presence. In that empty screen, Jack Ma saw his reflection. Invisible. Ignored. And suddenly, He understood his purpose. Jack Ma returned to China and started an internet company. It failed. Money lost. Confidence shaken. But something was different this time. He wasn't ashamed. He was awake. A small apartment. 18 people sitting shoulder to shoulder. No air conditioning. No funding. No certainty. Jack Ma stood before them. He didn't promise riches. He promised struggle. Let's build a company that lasts longer than us. Alibaba was born, not in luxury, but in belief. Alibaba did not begin with momentum. It began with doubt. No one trusted online payments. No one believed small Chinese businesses could compete globally. No one thought a former English teacher could lead a tech revolution. Investors listened, then walked away. Banks smiled, then declined. Vision sounds like madness when results haven't arrived yet. Inside Alibaba's early days, fear lived quietly in every room. Bills stacked up. Salaries were delayed. Families questioned decisions. And still, no one quit. Not because they were fearless, but because Jack Ma had taught them something deeper. If we fail, we fail together. Jack Ma was not the most technical person in the room. He couldn't code. He didn't understand complex systems. But he understood human spirit. He hired people smarter than him. He trusted intuition over ego. He listened when others would dominate. True leadership is not knowing everything. It's knowing what matters. When mistakes happen, and they happen often, Jack didn't look for someone to blame. He looked for someone to grow. Alibaba was losing money fast. Competitors were aggressive. Resources were thin. Time was unforgiving. There were nights when Jack Ma stared at the ceiling wondering if he led everyone into a dead end. The hardest battles are fought in silence, when no one is watching, and quitting would be easy. But Jack Ma remembered something. He had already survived being rejected by the world. Failure no longer scared him. Then came eBay, a global giant. Money, power, experience. Many believed Alibaba would be crushed. But Jack Ma refused to fight with the enemy's weapons. Instead of copying eBay, he focused on local understanding, culture, trust, human connection. He didn't try to beat the giants at their game. He built a new game. Online payments were risky. Scams were common. Fear ruled consumer behavior. So Alibaba introduced escrow payments, holding money until buyers confirmed satisfaction. A radical idea, a risky move, but it changed everything. Trust entered the system. And with trust came growth. At one point, Alibaba was days away from collapse. Money almost gone. Morale stretched thin. Jack Ma gathered his team. No motivational slogans. No false promises. Just truth. We may not succeed, but we will not regret trying. That honesty bound them tighter than success ever could. Then, slowly, things changed. Users grew. Merchants joined. Revenue followed belief. Investors returned, this time listening carefully. Alibaba was no longer an idea. It was a force. Sometimes success doesn't arrive loudly. It knocks softly and waits to see if you're still standing. Jack Ma was. Alibaba went public. It became one of the largest IPOs in history. The man rejected from 30 jobs stood at the center of global attention. Applause replaced doubt. Praise replaced silence. But Jack Ma remained unchanged. Jack Ma often said, "Today is hard. Tomorrow will be worse. But the day after tomorrow will be sunshine." He never glorified wealth. He glorified endurance. He spoke for the overlooked, the late bloomers, the underestimated, because he was one of them. Jack Ma didn't hide his failures. He honored them. He told young people not to fear rejection, not to fear being last, not to fear starting small, because that was his story. This is not a story about Alibaba. It's a story about refusal to disappear, about choosing belief when evidence is missing, about standing up when the world sits you down. Jack Ma was not special because he succeeded. He was special because he persisted. If you've been rejected, if you've been overlooked, if you feel invisible, remember this. The world once rejected Jack Ma too, and it was wrong. Success is loud. Cameras flash. Crowds gather. Numbers climb. But after the interviews end, after the stages are empty, after the headlines move on, there is quiet. And in that quiet, a man finally meets himself. Jack Ma had everything the world said would make him whole. Money, influence, a name recognized across continents. Yet he never spoke of success as a rival. He spoke of it as responsibility. Chapter 25, The Weight of Being Seen. For most of his life, Jack Ma was invisible. Now he was everywhere. But visibility carries weight. Every word dissected, every mistake magnified, every silence questioned. The same world that once ignored him now watched closely. The world doesn't just test you when you fail. It tests you again when you win. At the peak of Alibaba's power, Jack Ma did something unexpected. He stepped back, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but out of understanding. He believed leadership was not about control, but about continuity. If a company depends on one man, he said, it has already failed. So he let go, and in letting go, he proved something rare. Success did not own him. Jack Ma didn't inspire people who were already winning. He inspired the ones still waiting, the ones who felt behind, the ones who felt slow, the ones who had been told, it's too late. He never erased his past to sound powerful. He used it to sound honest, because he knew something the world forgets. Most people don't quit because they fail. They quit because they believe failure defines them. Jack Ma spoke fluently in failure. He had lived there long enough to understand its lessons. Failure taught him humility. Failure taught him empathy. Failure taught him patience. And patience is what separates dreamers from builders. In a world obsessed with speed, Jack Ma arrived late. Late to success. Late to recognition. Late to applause. But he arrived ready. Some people arrive early and break under pressure. Others arrive late and last. This story is not about Alibaba. Not about billions. Not about IPOs or markets. It's about you, the one still applying, the one still failing, the one still trying to believe when evidence says otherwise. If you feel behind, you are not broken. If you feel rejected, you are not finished. If you feel invisible, you are not irrelevant. The world celebrates Jack Ma's success, but it never saw the quiet mornings, the unanswered applications, the moments of self-doubt that never made headlines. Greatness is not built in public. It is built where no one claps. Somewhere right now, someone is thinking of giving up, not because they are weak, but because they are tired. Tired of being last. Tired of explaining their dreams. Tired of believing alone. Jack Ma stood in that place once. Rejected by schools. Rejected by jobs. Rejected by the future he imagined. And yet, he stayed. Stay when the door doesn't open. Stay when your name isn't called. Stay when success seems reserved for others. Because sometimes the only difference between a forgotten life and a world-changing one is one more day of persistence. The world rejected Jack Ma. He did not argue. He did not beg. He simply outlasted the rejection. And one day, the world had no choice but to listen. If the story moved something inside you, if it reminded you of a time you were told no, if it felt like your own journey reflected back at you, then this story was meant for you. Someone else needs to hear this. Someone close to quitting. Someone questioning their worth. Share this video, not for views, but for impact. If you believe stories like this matter, stories that give strength, not just entertainment, subscribe, because this channel is for the ones still becoming. And before you go, leave a comment, not just great video. Tell us, what rejection are you still pushing through? Your words might be the hope someone else needs tonight. The world may reject you, but your story isn't over. Stay. Keep building. We'll see you in the next story. Howard Schultz. From the projects to the power of a cup of coffee. Howard Schultz was not born into comfort. He was not born into opportunity. And he was certainly not born into wealth. long before the world knew his name, long before Starbucks became a symbol recognized in every corner of the globe. Howard Schultz was just a boy growing up in a cramped apartment in Brooklyn, New York, surrounded by struggle, uncertainty, and quiet desperation. This is not a story about coffee. This is a story about dignity, about belief, about a man who grew up watching his father lose everything and decided that someday, somehow, he would build a company that treated people differently. Howard Schultz was born in 1953 in Brooklyn's Canarsie housing projects. His world was small. The hallways were narrow. The ceilings were low. And hope often felt even lower. His father, Fred Schultz, was a blue-collar worker, a delivery truck driver, a factory worker, a man who took whatever job he could find just to keep food on the table. There was no safety net, no insurance, no backup plan. One winter day, Howard's father slipped on ice while working. He injured his ankle badly. That single moment changed everything. There was no health insurance, no workers' compensation, no paid leave. Fred Schultz lost his job, and with it, the family lost ability. Howard watched his father sit at home, injured and ashamed, not because he was lazy, but because the system had no place for a man who was hurt. That image burned itself into Howard's memory. I saw what happens when someone is treated as disposable, Howard would later say. It wasn't anger that grew inside him. It was resolve. Howard grew up knowing what it meant to go without. Hand-me-down clothes, shared bedrooms, a constant awareness that one wrong move could send the family spiraling. But poverty also taught him something powerful. It taught him observation. Howard watched how adults spoke when money was tight, how pride quietly disappeared, how dreams slowly shrank. He didn't grow up dreaming of being rich. He grew up dreaming of escape, not escape from work, but escape from fear. Sports became Howard's lifeline. Football, baseball, anything that gave him structure, discipline, and a temporary escape from reality. That discipline paid off. Howard earned a football scholarship to Northern Michigan University, the first person in his family to attend college. To the outside world, it didn't look like much, but to Howard, it was everything. College wasn't just education. It was proof that he could leave, proof that he could rise, proof that his life didn't have to end where it began. Still, he felt out of place. Many of his classmates came from families with connections, confidence, and money. Howard came from grit, but grit has its own kind of power. After graduation, Howard moved to New York City and took a job in sales at Xerox. On paper, it was a great job, good pay, prestige, security, but something felt off. Howard was succeeding, yet he felt empty. He wasn't building something. He was selling something. And then, almost by accident, everything changed. Howard took a job at a small company that sold coffee beans and equipment. The company's name? Starbucks. At the time, Starbucks was tiny, just a handful of stores in Seattle. They didn't sell lattes. They didn't sell cappuccinos. They sold coffee beans. But Howard noticed something strange. Customers were obsessed. They talked about coffee with passion, with respect, with ritual. This wasn't just a product. It was a culture, and Howard wanted to understand it. In 1983, Howard traveled to Italy. What he saw there would change his life. Coffee shops weren't just places to buy drinks. They were community hubs. People stood at counters talking, laughing, connecting. Baristas knew customers by name. Coffee wasn't rushed. It was experienced. Howard had an epiphany. What if we could bring this feeling to America? Not just coffee, but connection. Howard returned to Seattle bursting with ideas. He pitched the vision to Starbucks founders. They said no. They didn't want to become a cafe business. They wanted to sell beans. Howard was devastated, but something inside him refused to let go. So he did something terrifying. He quit. Howard started his own company, Il Jornal. No money, no guarantees, just belief. He raised capital the hard way, knocking on doors, hearing no after no after no. Investors laughed. Coffee? Community? Americans won't stand at counters. But Howard remembered his father. He remembered what it felt like to be powerless. And He kept going. People came. They stayed. They returned. And then, in a stunning twist of fate, the original Starbucks owners decided to sell. Howard seized the moment. He raised the money. He bought Starbucks. And he merged his vision with the name. Howard didn't just want profit. He wanted purpose. He introduced health care for part-time employees, something unheard of in retail, stock options for baristas, respect for workers, dignity in labor. This wasn't charity. It was philosophy. We're not in the coffee business serving people. We're in the people business serving coffee. Once Howard Schultz took control of Starbucks, growth was no longer a dream. It was a storm. New stores opened not yearly, not monthly, but weekly. Seattle became San Francisco. San Francisco became Chicago. Chicago became New York. The green siren appeared everywhere. To the public, it looked like success. To Howard, it felt like pressure, because growth tests values. And Howard had promised himself one thing. We will never become the kind of company my father worked for. Howard believed Starbucks should be more than home and work. It should be a third place, a place where students could study, strangers could talk, people could feel seen. This philosophy guided everything. The lighting, the music, the smell of fresh coffee. Every detail mattered. Starbucks wasn't selling caffeine. It was selling belonging. As competitors focused on automation, Howard did something radical. He invested in people. Baristas were trained, not rushed. Names were written on cups. Smiles were encouraged. Critics called it inefficient. Howard called it human. And customers responded. In 1992, Starbucks went public. Howard Schultz rang the bell. But unlike most CEOs, his first thought wasn't wealth. It was fear, because Wall Street doesn't invest in feelings. It invests in numbers. Could value survive shareholders? Howard decided they had to. Chapter 15, The Pressure Scale. With thousands of stores, cracks began to form. Quality slipped. Stores felt rushed. The magic faded. Coffee machines blocked eye contact. Speed replaced connection. Howard knew it, and it haunted him. In 2000, Howard Schultz stepped down as CEO. He believed the culture was strong enough to survive without him. He was wrong. By 2007, Starbucks was overextended. Customer satisfaction dropped. The stock collapsed. The company had lost its soul. Howard returned as CEO in 2008. The world was in recession, and Starbucks was bleeding. He made brutal choices, closed 600 stores, laid off thousands, retrained every barista. One night, he closed all U.S. stores for training. Wall Street panicked. Howard didn't care. Howard brought Starbucks back to basics. Coffee first, people first, purpose first. He removed automated systems, brought back espresso craft, reconnected employees to meaning. It wasn't fast, but it worked. Howard believed silence was complicity. Starbucks took positions on race, on refugees, on education. In 2018, after a racial profiling incident, Howard shut down 8,000 stores for racial bias training. Critics screamed. Howard stood firm. We will not be perfect, but we will be accountable. Howard faced backlash, political criticism, boycotts, personal attacks. But he remembered Brooklyn. He remembered his father, and he chose courage over comfort. Howard stepped down again, this time for good. Starbucks was no longer a startup. It was a global institution, but its foundation was intact. Howard Schultz didn't just build Starbucks. He redefined retail culture, employee benefits, corporate conscience. He proved you could scale values, that you could win without forgetting where you came from. Howard once said, "I don't want my life to be about money. I want to be about impact." The boy from the projects kept his promise. Howard Schultz's story reminds us of something vital. Where you start does not decide where you finish. Your past does not disqualify your future. And sometimes, the greatest companies aren't built from ambition. They're built from empathy. Because one man who watched his father lose dignity decided to build a company that would give it back. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why purpose matters, if it inspired you to believe again, like the video. Subscribe for more real stories of resilience. And leave a comment. What part of Howard Schultz's journey spoke to you most? Before the cameras, before the applause, before the world pronounced her name with admiration, there was a red dirt road in Mississippi, a small house that leaned more on prayer than on walls, and a little black girl who did not yet know that the world would one day lean on her. Oprah Gail Winfrey was born into a story the world often ignores. A story of poverty, resilience, and quiet survival. Her mother was young. The world was heavy. Resources were few, but the spirit inside that child was already vast. In her grandmother's house, she learned before she was meant to. Books became her refuge. Words became her armor. Language became her first act of freedom. She did not just read. She remembered. She did not just speak. She commanded. But childhood was not gentle with her. She moved between worlds, from the tenderness of her grandmother's home to the harsh streets of Milwaukee. Different skies, different rules, same struggle. A child trying to belong in places that did not know how to hold her. Between 9 and 13, something broke inside her. Not her spirit, but her innocence. Abuse entered her life like an uninvited storm. Silent, devastating, stealing what could never be returned. Her body became a battlefield. Her voice became trapped. Her childhood interrupted. But even in that darkness, something within her refused to die. A quiet fire, a stubborn hope, a divine refusal to be destroyed. Many would have collapsed. Many would have disappeared. Many would have surrendered. Oprah did not. At 14, she carried life, a life that would not stay. Her son was born too soon. He lived too briefly and left too quickly. Grief entered her young heart like a permanent guest. Another reason to fall. Another reason to give up. Another reason to disappear into pain. Instead, she chose to be reshaped by it. Sent to live with her father in Nashville, she found structure, rules that built her, not confined her, discipline that sharpened her, not silenced her. She excelled. She spoke. She stood. And the microphone found her. Her voice was not just heard. It moved people. At 19, Oprah was already in front of the camera. Not as a guest, not as a face in the crowd, but as a journalist. A black woman commanding space in a world not designed for her. She was not just reporting news. She was becoming news. But destiny was not finished shaping her yet. When she stepped into daytime television, the industry did not know what to do with her. She was too real, too emotional, too human. And that is exactly why she would change everything. A struggling talk show, a skeptical audience, an industry waiting for her to fail. Instead, she revolutionized it. The Oprah Winfrey Show became more than television. It became a mirror, a confession booth, a classroom, and a healing space. She did not just interview people. She saw them. She spoke about trauma. She spoke about faith. She spoke about shame, healing, forgiveness, and truth. And in doing so, she gave millions permission to face their own pain. She did not shrink herself to fit the room. She expanded the room to fit her. Oprah did not stop at being a host. She became a creator, a producer, a leader. Harpo Productions, own network, films, books, education, philanthropy. She built a kingdom not on domination, but on purpose. From a girl with nothing to a woman who created everything. Not just wealth, but impact. Not just fame, but transformation. Oprah Winfrey is not just a media mogul. She is a testimony written in flesh and blood. A reminder that your beginning does not define your ending. That pain can become power. That silence can become sovereignty. She did not erase her wounds. She learned from them. She did not outrun her past. She outgrew it. To every child in the shadows, to every dream dismissed, to every heart still healing, Oprah's life speaks. You are not your pain. You are not your past. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. Oprah Winfrey, born into struggle, shaped by suffering, and destined for greatness. In the end, Her story is not just about television, not just about wealth, not just about influence. It is about becoming. Oprah Winfrey did not escape her past. She carried it, healed it, and transformed it. She turned wounds into wisdom, pain into purpose, silence into a voice that changed the world. From red dirt roads to global stages, from broken beginnings to boundless impact, she stands as living proof that destiny is not inherited. It is forged. And so her life leaves us with a question that echoes beyond the screen. If she could rise, what could you become? Oprah Winfrey, a life that began in struggle, but will forever be remembered in light. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, exile, imprisonment, and the rise of Africa's first elected female president. Power does not always announce itself with weapons. Sometimes it arrives quietly, armed only with truth. In a continent shaped by revolutions, coups, and civil wars, one woman chose a different path. She challenged dictators with words. She confronted corruption with numbers. She faced prison with dignity. She was labeled dangerous. She was forced into exile. She was locked behind iron bars. Yet, she became a symbol of hope, not only for Liberia, but for Africa itself. This is the story of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, a woman who lost her freedom to defend democracy and rose to become Africa's first elected female president. Ellen Eugenia Johnson was born in 1938 in Monrovia, Liberia. Liberia was unique, founded by formerly enslaved Africans, yet deeply divided. Power belonged to a small elite. Most citizens lived on the margins. From an early age, Ellen witnessed inequality woven into everyday life. She saw who had access to education, and who did not, who governed, and who suffered. Her parents believed in discipline and learning. Education was not optional, it was survival. But Ellen's path was not easy. She married young, became a mother of four, while still discovering herself. Eventually, her marriage collapsed under strain. She stood at a crossroads familiar to many women. Choose comfort or choose purpose. She chose purpose. Ellen traveled to the United States to study economics and finance. At a time when African women were expected to stay silent, she studied power, how money moves, how nations rise, how systems collapse. She earned degrees from Madison Business College and Harvard University. Numbers became her language. Policy became her weapon. When she returned to Liberia, she entered government service, not as a figurehead, but as a reformer, and that made her dangerous. In 1980, Liberia changed forever. A violent coup overthrew the government. Master Sergeant Samuel Doe seized power. Hope turned to fear. Executions became public. Criticism became fatal. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was appointed Minister of Finance, but she quickly saw the truth. Corruption was replacing governance. She refused to be silent. In speeches and policy debates, she criticized mismanagement and authoritarian rule. She warned the nation, a government without accountability will destroy itself. The regime listened, and they responded with force. In 1985, Ellen ran for Senate. Her campaign was bold. Her words were fearless. She accused the government of stealing Liberia's future. Within weeks, she was arrested, charged with treason, sentenced to 10 years in prison. Her children watched their mother disappear behind prison gates. The message was clear. Speak again and you will die. Inside prison, Ellen faced isolation and intimidation. But prison revealed something powerful. That courage does not require freedom. She later said prison stripped away fear. Because once everything is taken from you, truth is all that remains. International pressure secured her release, but she was not allowed to stay. Exile took Ellen far from home, but never away from responsibility. She worked in global financial institutions, the World Bank, the United Nations, regional development banks. She gained what dictators feared most, global credibility. While Liberia descended into civil war, Ellen spoke relentlessly. She warned the world. She criticized warlords. She demanded peace. Her exile was not escape. It was preparation. Liberia collapsed into chaos. Civil war destroyed cities. Children became soldiers. Women became refugees. Ellen watched from afar, helpless, heartbroken, yet determined. Many urged her to stay away. Liberia was too dangerous, too broken. But she believed something radical, that nations heal through leadership, not abandonment. When peace negotiations finally ended the war in 2003, Ellen returned. She returned to ruins. In 2005, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf ran for president. She faced former war leaders, political violence, deep cultural bias. Many doubted a woman could lead a traumatized nation, but Liberians saw something different. They saw experience, integrity, strength without brutality. Her message was simple. Liberia needs healing, not revenge. When the votes were counted, history shifted. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf won. Africa had its first elected female president, a former prisoner, a former exile, now a head of state. Her victory echoed beyond Liberia. It challenged every assumption about leadership in Africa. She governed with discipline and reform, fought corruption, restored international trust. In 2011, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, not for perfection, but for perseverance. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf's life proves something timeless. That power does not belong only to the loudest voice. That leadership is not born, it is forged. That a woman's courage can change a continent. From prison cells to presidential halls. Her journey is a reminder. History bends toward those who refuse to bow. If this story inspired you, like this video, subscribe for more powerful true stories, and leave a comment below. Backhand index pointing right, what part of her journey moved you the most? Because courage still matters, and stories like this must be told. History remembers many leaders, but it honors only a few who change how leadership looks. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was not shaped by power. She shaped it. Prison tried to break her spirit. Exile tried to distance her from her people. Patriarchy tried to limit her reach. Yet she stood. She stood when it was dangerous. She stood when it was lonely. She stood when the world told her no. From the cold walls of a prison cell to the highest office of her nation, her journey tells us something timeless. That courage is stronger than fear. That truth outlives oppression. That leadership is not given, it is earned. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf did more than make history. She opened a door that can never be closed. A door for African women. A door for democratic leadership. A door for every girl who dreams of leading. And so her story remains, not just in books, but in the future she helped create. If the story moved you, inspired you, or challenged you, like this video, subscribe for more powerful true stories, and leave a comment below. What does courage mean to you? Because history is still being written, and courage still matters. Thomas Sankara, the fire that refused to die. Africa is a continent of contrasts, a land rich in gold, culture, history, and resilience, yet scarred by centuries of exploitation, colonization, and external domination. For generations, African nations were shaped not by their own people, but by foreign powers who drew borders, controlled resources, and dictated destinies. Out of this history of struggle, some leaders emerged who accepted the system, others resisted, and a rare few dared to completely challenge it. This is the story of one such man, a man born into poverty, shaped by hardship, and destined to ignite a revolution that would shake not only his nation, but the entire continent. This is the story of Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara. In 1949, in what was then called Upper Volta, a name imposed by French colonial rule, a child was born into a world defined by inequality. Thomas Sankara did not arrive with privilege. There were no grand celebrations, no wealth, no promises of power. His family lived modestly. His father, Joseph Sankara, served in the colonial military. His mother, Marguerite, worked tirelessly to support her children. Like many African families, they endured uncertainty, a nation struggling to define itself after colonial rule. As a young boy, Sankara walked dusty roads, saw farmers bending under the sun, women carrying heavy loads, and children working instead of studying. Poverty was not an abstract concept to him. It was his daily reality. But within that hardship, something else was forming, a deep sense of empathy, justice, and awareness. While other children simply accepted their circumstances, Sankara quietly observed, questioned, and wondered, why must some suffer while others prosper? Sankara was not just another child in Upper Volta. In school, he stood out, not because of arrogance, but because of insight. Teachers noticed his sharp mind, discipline, and deep sense of fairness. He was thoughtful, quiet, but powerful in his ideas. While others played, Sankara reflected. He saw the injustice around him. Foreign companies extracting resources, local leaders living in luxury, and ordinary people left behind. These early observations planted the seeds of revolution. He began to understand that poverty was not an accident. It was a system. Growing up in a country struggling to find itself, Sankara also struggled with identity, not personally, but politically. Upper Volta was independent in name, but still tied economically and politically to France. This contradiction would stay with him for life. A free nation that was not truly free, a people who had independence, but not power, and a young Sankara who would one day challenge that reality. As Sankara grew older, he joined the military. But unlike many soldiers, he did not see the army as a tool of oppression. He saw it as a space to understand power. He trained rigorously, mastering discipline, strategy, and leadership. But his education extended beyond the barracks. Sankara read extensively: African history, anti-colonial movements, revolutionary philosophy. He studied leaders like Patrice Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral, and Che Guevara, figures who believed that true independence was economic, political, and cultural. In the military, Sankara was different. He played guitar, engaged in political debates, and refused to see himself as superior to civilians. To him, a true soldier was a protector of the people, not their ruler. Sankara's beliefs became clear. He rejected corruption. He rejected foreign dependency. He rejected inequality. He believed that Africa's greatest enemy was not just external. It was also internal corruption and complacency. Power, he believed, should serve the masses, not enrich a small elite. These ideas made him both admired and feared within political and military circles. By the early 1980s, Upper Volta was unstable. Corruption was rampant. Leaders lived in luxury while the majority struggled. Foreign influence remained strong. The people were frustrated. The youth were restless. Sankara emerged as a rising figure, not because he sought power, but because people trusted him. In 1983, following political upheaval, Sankara seized power in a popular revolutionary movement. And with that moment, Upper Volta would never be the same again. One of Sankara's first acts as leader was symbolic yet powerful. He changed the name of his country from Upper Volta, a colonial label, to Burkina Faso, meaning land of upright people. This was more than a name change. It was a rebirth, a declaration that Burkina Faso would no longer be defined by its colonizers, but by its own people. Sankara did not rule like a typical African president. He reduced his own salary. He sold luxury government cars and replaced them with bicycles. He urged ministers to live simply and serve honestly. He rejected personal wealth, believing that leadership was a responsibility, not a privilege. Sankara launched massive agricultural reforms. He encouraged farmers to grow more food locally, reducing dependence on foreign imports. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso achieved greater food self-sufficiency in just a few years. He believed that a nation that could feed itself was a nation that could never be controlled. Long before climate change became a global topic, Sankara took action. He initiated one of Africa's largest tree planting campaigns to combat desertification. Millions of trees were planted across Burkina Faso. He understood that protecting the land meant protecting the future. Sankara recognized that women were the backbone of African society. He outlawed forced marriages and female genital mutilation. He promoted women to leadership positions. He encouraged girls' education. He believed that a nation could not progress while half its population remained oppressed. Sankara was not afraid to challenge powerful nations. He rejected foreign aid that came with strings attached. He famously said, "He who feeds you controls you," at global forums. He spoke boldly against exploitation and economic domination of Africa. To many Western powers, he was dangerous. To many Africans, he was hope. Sankara walked among his people. He visited villages, spoke with farmers, and listened to workers. Literacy improved. Healthcare expanded. Corruption was challenged openly. For 4 years, Burkina Faso experienced a glimpse of what Africa could be. But revolution threatens powerful interests. On October 15, 1987, Thomas Sankara was assassinated in a coup led by his former ally, Blaise Compaoré. Gunshots echoed in Ouagadougou. A visionary was silenced. A dream was interrupted. Sankara was only 37 years old. They killed a man, but they could not kill his ideas. Today, Sankara's image is painted on walls across Africa. His speeches are studied. His ideals are carried by young activists. He remains a symbol of integrity, courage, and true leadership. Thomas Sankara was not perfect, but he was fearless, principled, and deeply committed to his people. Born in poverty, forged in struggle, shaped by injustice, and immortalized by revolution, Thomas Sankara was more than president. He was the conscience of a continent, and though his body fell, his vision still rises. Thomas Sankara lives. They took his body on that October day, but they could not take his spirit. They silenced his voice, but they could not silence his truth. Thomas Sankara did not live a long life, but he lived a meaningful one. He showed Africa what leadership could look like: humble, fearless, and rooted in people. He proved that poverty does not determine destiny, that power can serve the masses, and that a single vision can awaken a nation. Today, his name echoes in classrooms, in protests, in art, in music, and in the hearts of young Africans who refuse to accept injustice. Sankara is not just history. He is a reminder that dignity is non-negotiable, that independence must be real, not symbolic, that leadership is sacrifice, not privilege. Though his life was cut short, his ideas continue to walk the streets of Africa. Born in poverty, forged in struggle, unbroken in conviction, immortal in legacy, Thomas Sankara lives. If this story moved you, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment with what Thomas Sankara's legacy means to you. The grind is not punishment, it is preparation. Every early morning, every late night, every moment you choose discipline over comfort is building a version of you that your future self will thank. You may not see results today, but growth rarely announces itself loudly. It happens quietly, in consistency, in small daily decisions, in moments when you refuse to quit, even when no one is watching. Remember why you started. Remember the dreams that keep you awake, the life you want to create, the impact you want to leave behind. Success is not built in a single moment of glory. It is built in countless unseen moments of perseverance. The pressure you feel is shaping you, strengthening you, refining your character. When the grind feels heavy, remind yourself, discomfort is temporary, but regret lasts forever. You are not behind. You are in the process. You are not stuck. You are evolving. Trust your effort. Trust your timing. Trust your resilience. Keep going, even when motivation fades. Keep pushing, even when progress feels slow. You are closer than you think. The grind is forming greatness within you. Stay in it.
We must stand united for our future.